Hey guys, I'm Heidi Preeb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. Today on this channel, we're talking about the fear of abandonment. And what I want to go over is how this fear itself can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when we have a very simple and direct model of self-fulfilling prophecies, it looks something like this. We have a belief. We act as though the belief is the truth of the world because we actually think that it is, right? And then we go around self-selecting scenarios that confirm our belief and not noticing or not kind of logging scenarios that disconfirm our belief. So we're engaging mostly with things that reinforce what we already believe to be true. And then we get more of the same thing that we believe is true. And that reinforces the original belief that this is the way the world is. So if we were to run the fear of abandonment through this kind of simple belief model, it would look like this. So we might hold the belief, everybody is going to abandon me. It's only a matter of when. And then in our relationships, we treat people as though they are necessarily going to abandon us. And then because we treat them that way, they end up leaving or abandoning us, which brings us right back to our original belief. But this specific sequence of beliefs and actions could apply perfectly to someone with more secure patterning. To be securely attached means to be grounded in reality. And the reality, the absolute truth of the human condition, is that everybody we love absolutely will abandon us at some point or another in some large or small way. They will either abandon us when we are with them on this planet, or they will eventually abandon us through death. No matter how secure your relationship is, there is no relationship out there where partners do not, in small ways, fail to show up for each other or experience conflicts and ruptures along the course of their relationship. So abandonment is baked into the essence of every type of relationship that we will ever have. If we are insecurely attached and living with this deep fear of abandonment, what we are actually trying to do is achieve an unachievable goal, which is never getting abandoned. There is no way to personal develop our way into the type of person who will never get abandoned under any circumstance. What we actually need to do is find a way to shift our mindset towards the more secure model of abandonment, which looks the exact same, right? Secure people do believe that everybody is going to leave them at some point or another. And the way that they treat people when it comes to this second step, right, of treating people as though they will abandon you, is they treat them with presence and gratitude while they are with them. Because if I know that everybody I love is someday going to leave me, I just don't know how or when, it feels like an incredible gift to be treasured anytime I do have them in my presence and anytime we are feeling connected to each other. But if I'm living with a fear of abandonment, I am so preoccupied with my thoughts about the future, where I won't have this person in my life anymore, that I cannot be present with them in the moment. And this is what separates out a fear of abandonment from the fundamental human nature that we all share, which is that abandonment is a part of life. So what we want to target here is the fear, because it's that fear that is robbing us of the experience of deep presence and connection with the people in our lives. And it's that fear, if removed, that's going to return us to a state of reality where we understand that abandonment is inevitable, but we don't have to give up all of the good parts of our lives that are available to us before it happens. So I kind of liken this to someone who has more generalized anxiety, and they might have a lot of thoughts about all the different ways they could die. That person is not less likely to die than someone who does not have generalized anxiety. The same existential and physical threats are present for both of them all of the time. Maybe with some variation based on lifestyle preferences, but definitely not enough variation to protect one from ever dying or getting harmed. The difference is that one of those people lives with chronic worry and chronic mental suffering while the other does not. They both exist in the same base reality, but one of them is having a much more fulfilling experience, and one of them is having an experience of chronic suffering. So today we're going to talk about what gives us this deep fear of abandonment. If that fear, that anxiety, that worry is something that we live with, and what would need to happen so that we could shift out of that and we could enjoy being present with the lives that we have without chronically feeling preoccupied by what might happen in the future or what losses we are bound to incur. And I definitely do not believe that living with this fear of abandonment is a choice or that it's random. It's usually a direct product of the experiences that we've been through in life. But it's not necessarily the experiences that we might consciously tie it to. So we might think I have a fear of abandonment because of my first boyfriend, Ricky, who left me for a hotter girl in high school, when in reality, the fear that led to that worry about abandonment actually started much earlier than that, when we were abandoned in some significant way in childhood at a time when we needed to not be. So the difference between getting abandoned from a child state versus getting abandoned from an adult state is that when we are abandoned as children, what often happens is we are cut off from learning in some significant way. Because when we are young, what we need from our caregivers and from the people who are there to provide us with support through life is the safety to grow into ourselves as autonomous beings. So if there is some significant way in which our caregivers abandoned us as children, there may have been crucial things we did not learn. We might really struggle with emotional literacy and understanding ourselves when we are alone with ourselves. Or we might have gaps in our sexual development if certain events happened to us at a young age that caused us to shut down parts of ourselves that were innately connected to our sexual development. We may have never learned crucial skills around providing for ourselves and seeing ourselves as capable and worthy. So when we are literal children and we are still emotionally and cognitively growing into ourselves, when we are abandoned, it means that we are getting cut off from mentorship and wholeness. Because without that mentorship that we need to help us make sense of ourselves and how we exist in the world, we're not going to grow into people who are aware of ourselves in all areas. There's going to be some gap in the way that we experience ourselves in whatever area we were abandoned as young children. So this leads to self-abandonment. If I was never really mentored in a particular way, or I never had an adult help me contain and make sense of my experiences in some area, when I grow up, that area is going to be an area that I naturally neglect in myself, unless and until I draw conscious attention to it. So now there's some way in which I am cut off from my wholeness as an adult, if there were significant places where I was abandoned as a child. Now let's contrast this to the type of support and mentorship and containment that people who are more securely attached tended to have as children. When we have support all the way through in our childhood, growing into the people that we are going to be as adults, which means developing both our emotional selves, but also our intellectual selves and our skills for practically navigating the world and our relationships to our bodies and to our spiritual selves. If we have good enough mentorship in all of these areas, it gives us the scaffolding we need as adults to kind of take over our own development in those areas. And so now when we're out in the world, whether or not we're in close connection with other people, we feel whole. We feel as though we have internalized enough resource to go out and source for ourselves whatever we need to continue to develop in the areas that we want to do more work in. So to be secure as an adult means that you have self-intimacy, and there aren't significant areas of yourself that you naturally self-abandon or fail to show up for yourself in. When we aren't needing other people to come along and help us kind of fulfill parts of ourselves that we have never found a way to stay present with and develop inside of ourselves. We form connections with other people predominantly for serving the purpose of just having company. So we might turn to our close loved ones for co-regulation and for sharing our experiences of life, but we don't feel incomplete as people when we do not have them around. So when we are abandoned temporarily or in larger ways, it doesn't cause a crisis of self, the same way that it does for someone who is approaching abandonment from that place of childhood wounding, where abandonment, even as an adult, might still feel like you are being deprived of the resources that you need to be a whole person. So, we're going to look at how this cycle perpetuates itself. So, if you have those early developmental unmet needs, how that can lead to a cycle of abandonment that can be excruciatingly painful unless and until we start to address the problem at its core. So, this entire thing starts off through nobody's intentional choice with that unmet developmental need. So, let's say you were developing relatively normally up until a certain age in a certain area, whether that is emotional self awareness, interpersonal skills, autonomy, whatever it is. And then either some abandonment happened. So maybe your parent had some block that came up for them in their teenage years that left them immature in a particular way. And so now they can't really mentor you emotionally any further. So there's some developmental wound, some way in which you have not yet grown into your adult self that is present for you, that you may or may not be conscious of. And again, what this leads to is self-abandonment in that area. So if you never learned emotional regulation skills, you're going to not be able to stay present with yourself when really strong emotions come up. You might instead go into some sort of panic response and try to get your need met externally instead of being present with yourself and doing whatever emotional regulation you were taught as a child. And when we are abandoning ourselves in significant areas, what tends to happen is we only feel like we are whole when we are having the needs that we abandon ourselves around met externally. So now we're in this place where we only feel whole when we are in a particular type of intimate connection with someone else, because they are being present with us in the areas that we don't know how to be present with ourselves. And this often feels like a crazy big high. So this is the kind of love we fall into where it feels like we are finally complete and whole in a way that we didn't know was possible. And if we don't know any different, we might assume that's what love feels like for everyone, rather than more secure love feeling like a more equal experience of deep companionship and appreciation. So in that more secure form of love, you have two people relating to each other from mutual adult states in their ego. Neither is turning to the other as their sole source of getting some really deep and painful need met. Both are relatively resourced and they're relating to each other as equals. But when we're in this place where we do have that giant gaping need that we have no idea how to fill for ourselves, or maybe no conscious awareness that it even exists, it is going to feel excruciating if we experience a separation or a rupture from the person who is meeting that need for us. Because when a secure person gets abandoned, what they are losing is the other person's company. When an insecure person gets abandoned, what they are losing touch with in a lot of cases is their sense of wholeness. And this is much more painful and feels much more personal than the former. The problem is that we are generally unconscious of this being the case. All we know is that it feels excruciatingly painful when someone leaves. And so now, if we are in this place and we get abandoned, we are not responding to the other person as though we are losing their company. We are responding to the other person as though they are robbing us of our wholeness. And that is a very, very large crime to be punishing someone for. And the thing is, it is literally true, if we only feel whole around this other person, that when we are not around them, we don't feel whole. So our emotional selves are telling us the truth about what is happening, but with the wrong attribution. It is not this person's fault that we do not feel whole when we are alone. Their absence is just returning us to the state of fragmentation and lack of wholeness that was there before they came along. But because our emotional selves don't know that, we're just going to feel the intensity of the pain and assume that their leaving is what caused that. And this is where it gets really easy to push even the most secure of people away. Because if we are punishing someone For a crime as great as robbing us of our wholeness, it's going to feel very confusing to the other person when the only crime they committed in reality was robbing us of their company, which is a painful experience, right? If we're in a secure connection with someone and we're having a moment where we really want them to be present and with us and we want that co-regulation and they're just not able to meet us there, it's going to feel lonely, but it's not going to feel unbearable because we still have that inner resource to show up for ourselves in that moment. But again, if as soon as someone is gone, we are returned to the state that feels unbearable for us, we're going to be punishing them for an offense that is much greater than the one that they actually committed. And this is, in most cases, going to lead to feelings of disorientation, confusion, and resentment in the other person, because they know on an emotional level, I am being punished to a much higher magnitude than what fits the actual crime. Or even in the best case scenario where they're desperately trying to give us what we need, if we ourselves are not deeply conscious of what that need is, they're never going to be able to fulfill it for us. And we are going to continuously try to get them to. And so eventually, our partner might start feeling like they are up against an impossible task, which in most cases is going to lead to chronic feelings of overwhelm, like there are expectations they have no idea how to fulfill, and disconnection, which might lead to the relationship ending. And that's going to reinforce that belief, right? Everybody leaves. And then you're right back where you started in that place of self-abandonment. When we're in that place at the end of a relationship, the fixation we develop mentally might be, how do I find a partner who is not going to abandon me next time? But that question is the wrong question. The question we need to be asking is, what are these huge unmet needs I am placing on my partner that are causing tiny abandonments to feel so unbearable? So we're going to contrast this with what a more secure relationship cycle looks like when it faces moments of abandonment, just to get a little bit of an idea of how else this could go. So when we do have that good enough development as children, and we grow into relatively secure adults who feel whole in their emotional selves. Now, in the place of that self-abandonment, we have self-intimacy and wholeness. So the ability to feel like a complete person when we are on our own. And being a complete and whole person includes a sense of security and an ease in which we form connections. The world naturally feels abundant with people we could have potential connections with, because we know that we have the skills we need to relate from an adult to adult place. So when we are around others, we're relating from that adult to adult place, where we feel whole and we are appreciating the wholeness of someone else. Then, if and when an abandonment happens, so a rupture occurs in the relationship, there's an argument, something goes wrong. Instead of desperately clamoring to figure out how to get back into a state of feeling whole, we're able to focus on how we can invite the other person back into a state of connection. Because we are okay, and we assume that they are okay and capable of taking care of themselves. And so the only thing to really figure out is what wasn't working here. Where were we not on the same page? How were we not aligning? And how can we make sure in the future we're able to stay in connection in this area? Or maybe this is an area where we're just never really going to be super close, but this particular area isn't one where it feels particularly important for them to always be on the same page as us. Maybe this is an area where we have friends who can fulfill those emotional intimacy needs in the way that we need, and vice versa. So there's a lot of flexibility and creativity when it comes to how to stay in connection. So now when there's some sort of rupture, there's somewhere you really wanted your partner to meet you and see you where they didn't. And you make that invitation to them, hey, I'm comfortable with this part of myself. I want to show it to you, and I want to feel seen by you here. Are you willing to do that with me? Are you willing to kind of work with me to get on the same page in this area? Or not? If they are able to meet you there, now you're back in adult-to-adult connection. Or if the request does not work for the other person, maybe they themselves are not particularly secure, and they haven't met themselves in an area where you're asking them to meet you, and that request feels too overwhelming for them, it could lead to a rupture that doesn't get repaired. And maybe the relationship ends. But if so, where do you get returned to? Back to that place of self-intimacy and wholeness, which once again gives you the skills you need for going out and sourcing new secure connections from a place of resource rather than desperation. So again, the goal here is not to become unabandonable. And it's also not to find a partner who we are absolutely certain is never going to abandon us. It's to build ourselves and to reparent ourselves into people who can tolerate abandonment on both a small scale and a large one. That is the thing that's going to make that chronic fear of abandonment that robs us of our ability to be present and appreciative of our relationships and our lives as they're happening finally leave us alone. So, the oldest and most well known study in attachment theory is known as the strange situation procedure. It was a procedure developed by a woman named Mary Ainsworth right at the beginning of attachment theory springing into existence, where she designed a stressful situation that showed patterns of behavior that different children exhibited in a situation where they got separated from their caregiver. So, in the strange situation procedure, what would happen is a child and a parent would be playing in a room, and then a stranger would come into the room. And then the parent would leave the room, so the child would now be alone with the stranger. Children who were not securely attached experienced prolonged distress responses to their parents being gone. So once their parents left the room, if the children appeared more anxious, they tended to get extremely distraught and stay distraught until the parent returned. If they appeared avoidant, they tended to ignore the stranger and stay really focused on playing with their toys or self-soothing in some way, but they were experiencing physiological distress while their parents were gone. Secure children tended to cry when their parents left the room, but then they would adjust to the situation, and they would often turn to the stranger who they had witnessed their parent interacting with in a trustful way, and they would play with the stranger, which would help ease their distress. So what we see happening in this situation is secure children do experience grief and pain when they feel separated from their caregivers, but they're able to adjust to the situation that they're left in because they have an internal working model of the world as a safe place where their needs can get met. So instead of staying fixated on the fact that their caregiver is gone, they turn to what options are available in my environment now, interpersonally, that will help me meet my needs now that I've experienced and moved through my grief over my needs not getting met in the way that I wanted, which is by my caregiver. And this is the same model we want to end up with as adults. When we are secure adults, we still experience pain and grief and distress when we are abandoned by the people we're closest to. Whether that is, once again, a very overt abandonment, so someone leaving us or someone dying, or a more commonplace, small-scale abandonment, so our partner being kind of zoned out when we really want their attention, or something like that. We still experience that grief and that pain of disconnection, but because we are internally resourced, we're able to readjust once we move through that pain and go, okay, if this person is not available to me for whatever reason in this moment, who can I turn to get my needs met? How can I find a different way to self-regulate? So there's a lot of flexibility and adaptiveness in the secure model of processing, including processing abandonment. It will still hurt to get abandoned, but that hurt will not be the stopping point. That hurt will be something that is faced directly, moved through, and then a solution will be found on the other side. So the real trick here is figuring out at what part of that process am I blocked? Like the avoidant child, am I blocked in the area that causes me to experience conscious distress over my caregiver leaving? So if this is the case as an adult, you might not feel much consciously when you're experiencing separation or abandonment, but you will still be having an elevated stress response that you are not aware of. And because you won't be dealing with that and moving through it on an emotional level, that stress is likely to persist and you're likely to have your blinders on when it comes to how you could get your interpersonal needs met now. And if you are more anxious, you might feel so preoccupied with the way that you want your needs to get met, which is through a specific other person, that you might struggle to self regulate in the face of grief and distress. So you never move through your emotions in a way that allows you to arrive on the other side of them and notice what options are available to you now. So, what we want to look at is where is the area where I need to increase my self resource so that I can feel whole in the instances where I am being abandoned? Do I need to up my emotional literacy? Do I need to learn that the times when I'm feeling physiologically distressed, it's likely there's some emotion that I'm repressing that needs to be brought into my conscious awareness? Or do I need to find a way to contain my emotions and lean on my ability to be autonomous as an adult so that I feel whole and complete when I am on my own? And all of this is, in essence, just the art of attachment healing, right? The art of rounding ourselves out in the areas where we once experienced neglect or abandonment and becoming people who are able to cope with a wide variety of situations that life might throw at us. Again, this will not keep us from being abandoned, but it will take the fear and preoccupation out of our experience. And when that is out of our experience, we can be more present, more engaged, more grateful for the people in our lives, which is both likely to lead to less abandonment, but also likely to just increase our satisfaction with our life and our relationships all around, no matter how they end up going. All right, I think that's all I'm going to say for today on the topic of the fear of abandonment. But as always, let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking, feeling, any questions you have. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again very soon.